Hi, Sarah. How are you? I was hoping you could introduce yourself and talk a little bit about your time at Organomation.
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. So, my name is Sarah Johnson. I'm a marketing specialist here at Organomation. I've been with the company for almost 4 years now. I started out in sales and I've since moved more towards a marketing role. So, I've had a lot of experience at all ends of the purchasing decision process with customers and getting laboratories the equipment they need, and I've really enjoyed it.
That's great to hear. Organomation obviously specializes in nitrogen blowdown evaporation. I was hoping you could talk about the main types of nitrogen blowdown evaporators.
Yeah, so the two most common types of blowdown evaporators on the market are what we call flexible evaporators and batch evaporators. So, flexible evaporators are like our N-Evap product line. So, they're designed to accommodate a variety of different sample types, whether that be varying solvent type, solvent volume, tube size, tube shape, and they often have adjustable sample holders to fit all these different tube types, and they usually have some sort of individual control of gas flow at each sample position as well. And this just makes it easy to evaporate samples that may have different parameters at the same time in the same unit. And these types of evaporators are usually used by research labs who either just have a lot of projects going on at once or need to share the unit across multiple teams. And batch evaporators, on the other hand, are more like our microvap and multivap product lines. So they're designed to accommodate large batches of identical samples. So, unlike the flexible evaporators, batch evaporators maintain even heat and gas flow across all samples to make sure they're evaporating at the same rate. And all the gas delivery needles on the unit are typically connected to a single manifold, so it just makes it easier to start and stop evaporation at the same time. And these types of evaporators are usually used by testing laboratories who have high throughput requirements and really benefit from the speed of the evaporator.
I was hoping that today we could provide people with some tips on how to go about purchasing a nitrogen blowdown evaporator. What are the main factors you think should be considered when trying to select a blowdown evaporator?
Yeah, so there's a lot of factors that should be going into this type of decision, but for today, I thought it would just be helpful to go through the top five that I think are the most important to consider. So these top five include sample capacity, so will the unit be able to fit all my samples at once? Vial size flexibility, will it be able to fit all the tube sizes that I use? Nitrogen consumption, will my current nitrogen source be able to supply the evaporator? Temperature range, can it reach and maintain the temperatures that I need? And then, probably the most important is price range. So, does the price fit in my available budget?
Always important. For those top factors, could you talk a little bit about how they impact the choice of evaporator?
Yeah, definitely. So, starting at the beginning, let's looking at sample capacity. So, it's important to look at the sample batch size that you typically work with to know what sample capacity you'll require. Say, for example, your typical batch size is 24 samples, but you may be looking at purchasing an evaporator with only 12 positions. So it's important to keep in mind that you'll have to run two evaporation cycles, and then depending on how long each cycle takes, it could really slow down your workflow. And then on the flip side, you also don't want to purchase an evaporator with too high of a capacity. Higher capacity units obviously have a larger footprint, so you'll be taking up a lot of extra benchtop space that could be used for other instruments. And if you're running the entire evaporator but only filling half the positions, you risk wasting that extra nitrogen gas. So it's really important to find an evaporator with the appropriate capacity for your needs. Moving on to vial size flexibility. It's important to think about all the different tube sizes and shapes that you'll be working with and wanting to fit in the evaporator. So, if you're working with a lot of different tube types with varying heights, diameters, just overall shape, you'll want to make sure that they can all fit securely in the unit. And if the evaporator you're looking at uses racks or blocks to hold the samples, you'll want to know whether you'll have to purchase additional ones for each tube size used. You want to think if they're easily interchangeable or not, what is required to switch from one tube size or another. These are just important questions to have answered before making your purchasing decision. And if you're using multiple tube sizes at once, um, that's when a flexible evaporator is typically your best choice. But if you're only working with one or two different sizes, batch evaporators are pretty common. On to nitrogen consumption. So it's really important that you evaluate the nitrogen requirements of the evaporator that you're choosing. You want to make sure that you're choosing one that can fit the nitrogen supply that you already have in the lab. So you'll want to look at things like required flow rate, pressure, and overall consumption levels that the evaporator uses. And if your existing supply is, whether that be cylinders, generators, or whatever you're using, cannot meet these requirements, are you okay with taking on this additional expense of switching out your current gas source? If not, you'll want to try to find an evaporator with compatible gas requirements. Also, a good thing to consider would be if you're debating between two different models, choosing one with the lower consumption rate can save you a significant amount of money over time. Moving on to temperature range. This one's pretty self-explanatory, but just making sure the evaporator can reach and maintain the specific temperatures that you need to heat your sample at is very important. Evaporators typically heat samples either through a water bath or a dry heat block. So it's important to know which medium the evaporator you're looking at uses. Dry blocks typically have a higher temperature range, so they're more common for applications requiring anything higher than 90 degrees. Anything lower than that is typically fine in most evaporator types. And then lastly, but certainly not least, is price range. So probably the most important factor in choosing an evaporator is just making sure it's within your budget. Higher end models typically offer more advanced features and automation features, while the lower cost solutions may only provide the essential functions. But it's important to look at which features you truly need for your application versus the ones that just might be a bonus to have, and then balancing these factors with the overall cost just to make sure your needs are being met without breaking the bank.
That is some great advice. Do you have any other points that you'd like to make today?
Yeah, like I mentioned earlier, there's so many factors to consider when making this decision. And we do actually have a buyer's guide that goes through all the information that I talked about today, plus some additional considerations. Some other things it includes would be gas flow control, solvent compatibility, fume hood requirements, and things like warranty terms. Also in the buyer's guide, there's a breakdown of popular evaporator models on the market. So it goes through and provides information on all these different considerations for each model. And it's a really great tool if you're considering which unit to go with. It's easy to compare which one might be better for you. And I know this can be a lot of information for labs to take in and try to figure out on their own. So our team is always available to help you one-on-one if you want to talk about your application and which evaporator might be best. We're more than happy to help guide you in the process.
Thanks, Sarah. I really appreciate your time today.
Thank you so much.